Renfroe here, and welcome back to another episode of Mighty Monday, where we talk with real people, with real stories, with a real hope and faith in God. And so, yeah, everyone that's joining now or I'll catch us later. Just welcome to this episode, and hope your week's been good and your Monday's been good. And I'm excited tonight that I get to talk with my guest and friend, Erin Marsee. So, Erin, just a big welcome tonight. I'm excited to get to talk to you.
Hi.
Yeah, about your journey. And so, Erin's family, I think, is quite of a unique family, and we haven't got to meet in person yet. But we've almost crossed paths and are traveling. Erin's family is a traveling family that's been living on the road for the last 12 years. And Erin has said that they just left their place and everything in Kentucky to follow the Lord's leading. And so she's going to be talking to us about that, where that journey started, what it looks like, what God's taught her, and maybe some interesting stories along the way. It's an interesting life, and I know a lot of families actually that do it. Maybe not just like yours, Erin, but a lot of families do it. And we've been doing a bit of more traveling ourselves between our Texas home and Alberta home, where we are right now. And I'd like to do more of that, and just kind of to be on the road and just trust in the Lord and kind of go where He might want you to go. But where you want us to go, I want to hear your story. So if you'd introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your family, and where you want to start with your story.
We'll start at the beginning. My
Okay,
name is
yeah.
Erin, and let's see, my husband and 3 kids. We live in an RV, and we've been traveling for 12 years. We left from Kentucky, but the whole thing really started a couple years prior to leaving. Back then there were not a lot of like YouTube videos. You didn't see a lot of people traveling.
Yeah.
And we were going to a church, and we just started having this hunger for reaching the lost. I've always had this heart for evangelism, and so has my husband, but we didn't know how to reach people. We had tried things like just handing out tracts, or you know trying to build relationships with people, but we were like, how do we reach people? And so
Hi.
we started just really digging into scriptures and reading, and we just had this like desire to just go out and pray for people and talk to people. And so we started doing that, and we started inviting
Mhm.
people over to our house and just having dinner. I would cook a meal, and then we would all go out and see where God would take us, and we would go out and pray for people. And we started realizing that a lot of people need prayer, and a lot of times when you're not someone they know, they'll start to open up and they'll start to talk.
Mhm.
um, and so we would pray about where to go, and then we would just go out and we would just ask people, do you need prayer for anything?
Right.
And a lot of times they would just start sharing, they would just start opening up about things they were struggling with, things they knew that God didn't want them to be doing. They would, and um, they would start like really just sharing their hearts.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we would talk to them about that, and we
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah,
condemn anyone. We wouldn't say, well, now you need to pray this prayer and get saved. Like, it
yeah,
just wasn't about
yeah.
any of that. It was about meeting people face to face and just trying to help them. If there was a real need, we would try to meet those needs. And we loved doing this. It started with my husband and I and a couple couples from church, and we did this for about a year, and the testimonies from that alone are just amazing. The things that God
Yeah.
did, the healings He did, the
Wow.
um,
Yeah,
just getting to get people to be encouraged to seek out the Lord and have a relationship with Him. And um,
yeah.
but it was so empowering when you start praying for people and living your life in this way. My husband um, did video surveillance, and I stayed home with the kids. And he had his own business and was doing all of this. And we would do this on Tuesdays, but it just was like it was feeding our souls. Like
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
started
it was.
asking ourselves, like,
Wow.
what are we doing? Like, what are we doing with our lives? What are we spending our time doing? And he was
Mhm.
pursuing his business, and putting in surveillance systems and, talking to people about fear because, you need cameras and, there was this conflicting thing going on, with us, just with, uh, doing the business, but just feeling this draw to like want to help people. And so I guess partway through the year, my husband started reading scriptures. One thing that we started really doing, the two of us, was just forgetting everything we had been taught and just rereading the scriptures like a child, like asking the real questions, like, the words we throw around as Christians, grace and mercy and faith and being saved. And we throw these around, but we don't really take time to dig into them and find out what they mean. And so we kind of started doing that, starting from scratch. And in doing that, though, he started coming across the Sermon on the Mount, and you can't have two masters, and you can't serve both God and money. And it was like, in the same time, we're having this conflict because he's going and selling these systems, but we're like really just wanting to love and share Christ with people. And he would do some of that on the job, but he kept feeling these conflicts within him, like not wanting to stay focused on God, but as he's going out to give his job quotes, all he keeps coming back to is, what he's going to say in the quote and how he's going to do that. And so it was taking time away from his relationship with God. And he's, and so when he starts reading these scriptures about not serving God and money and how, you're going to love one and hate the other. And, he's just really started having these conflicts. And then, coming across the scripture in Luke, where he says that no man can be my disciple unless he forsakes everything. And so he's like, no man, like that's everyone. And, he starts reading these scriptures, and there's a lot of them in the Gospels. And he was like, okay. And he came to me with it. He was like, I'm finding these scriptures. And he's like, I'm not seeing where I can keep doing my job and serving the Lord at the same time. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like,
because that
we
was
have a mortgage and we have a house and we have all this stuff. And what are we doing? And, no. Nobody lives like that in America. Like if we were going to go to China or do some, big thing with a, some kind of ministry, then maybe that would work, but you can't do that here. And he's like, no, I'm seeing it. And he kind of let me chew on it for a while. And so he gave me his scriptures and we talked through some stuff. And he was going out to a job quote, and I was reading my Bible, and I read the scripture about it. Let's see. I wrote it down about in Matthew 13, where it says, and the other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. In verse 22, it says, as for what was sown among thorns, this is he who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the pleasures and delight and deceitfulness of riches choke and suffocate the word, and it yields no fruit. And that's the Amplified. But I started seeing like, oh my gosh, like I burst into tears, and I was like, because I was just really thinking about the scripture, and I'm like, I'm being choked. Like I care too much about you bringing in this money and us having this home, and that I'm being choked. And I literally burst into tears. I called him. He's on his way to his job quote, and I'm like, I see it. Like I can't. I was just like, it was just clicking. And and so at that point, he went and did the job quote, and he made the price really high, and they ended up going with him anyway. So it was like this blessing and just like weird. I'm like, okay, that's how we're going to pay off our debts. And anyway, that job ended up taking way longer than it should have. And we just cleared even. And because Joe was like, that's not what I'm seeing in scripture. Like we're not supposed to do this. Like we are supposed to serve the Lord. And so it was kind of at that point that we made that decision that, all right, we're going to serve the Lord, and we're going to figure out what this really means. And we're going to just go after these scriptures. And so he got his last paycheck in March of 2012 for his business. And we went around, and he told all his clients that we weren't going to be in business anymore, that we were just going to follow the Lord and see what that looked like. And it was really kind of scary because, we're like, all right, how does this look? And so we started putting some things up for sale, like our patio furniture and like things that we didn't really care about, right? Our grill, like things are like, oh, it doesn't matter. If this all is for naught, it's okay. And but as things started leaving, we noticed these like chains falling off. And it just felt like so freeing to start like just getting rid of all this stuff. And so he went around to his clients, told him he wasn't going to be in business anymore. And one of them came out and talked to him. And he said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Well, we're going to follow the Lord. We're going to travel. We're going to minister and help people and, share who Christ is with whoever will listen." And so
Wow.
one of the clients came to him and said, "I've had this truck and camper sitting out here for a year and no one's used it." He said, "I'd like to give it to you guys to go." And it was kind of at that point that we were like, wow, okay, this is like really something. Because all we had was a minivan and a pop-up camper, and they didn't know that, right? I mean, they're just
Yeah.
people he puts in the light system. They didn't know what
Yeah.
we were going to do or how we were going to live. And he's like, "I want to give this to you." And so now all of a sudden we had this truck and we had this camper, and we were like, all right, God, like, let's go. And so we started selling things. But as we were having this yard sale and selling things, we were both getting convicted. We're telling people we're going to trust God for everything, but I need $5 for this plate, or I need, $20 for this
Yeah.
piece of equipment from his workshop. And I was in the house and he was in the backyard, and we were both like just giving stuff away to people. We stopped selling it. We're like, we're either going to
Okay.
trust God or we're not, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
so we started doing that. And then through a mutual friend, there was actually another couple that God was moving from Pennsylvania down to Kentucky, and they were told to leave everything behind and come. So they came, just a couple, and we met up with them and we let them take the stuff that they wanted out of our house.
Yeah.
And they furnished their house and got, we took some things that we needed for the camper, and we just kind of started giving that stuff away. And it was so neat to watch how it took these little steps of faith and how God just continued to like multiply that and lead us. We had no idea what the vision was going to look like in the beginning or what it even meant. I think sometimes we tell ourselves we have faith, and it's not till the real like rubber hits the road that you start seeing where your faith really lies. And so we kind of, as we started getting rid of things, I came to this realization, and it was like chains came off every time something left. And it was almost like all our time and energy is put into this stuff. And I was finding that it really had no value to anyone. So I started looking around in our home, and you put our effort into making our money to buy these things, and it really has no value, even on earth. No one wants to give you anything for what you have. And so it really put things in perspective. And then being on this journey with Joe, I realized when he was no longer working, we made this decision together that we were going to trust the Lord. When your money starts running low, normally I would say, "Joe, you need to sell a system, or we need to do this and that." And he would say, "Let's pray about it." And so, we would pray about it, and we would say we're giving it to God, but it was really, Joe needs to sell some systems, right? Something needs to come. And we were still depending on that business to do that. And when you take that away, I realized how much I was putting Joe as my Lord instead of Christ as my Lord. Because I was relying on him and his business, and I wasn't really relying on the Lord. And now that was gone, it was kind of a step in that direction. And it was probably the beginning of our real pruning, when you had to wait together. And so we ended up leaving on October 2nd of 2012. And
Mhm.
we walked out the door with $200 to our name.
Mhm.
And somebody had given us $1,000 as we left. So we left the home with $1,200. The house was still for sale, and just a strong desire to see what God was going to do. And
Mhm.
one thing that we were very clear about in the very beginning was we were not going to raise funds. We were not going to solicit from our friends. If this was a journey that God was putting us on to serve people, then we were going to make God our Lord. We were going to
Mhm.
serve Him. And if He wanted to see this through, it wasn't going to be through us manipulating friends or, raising support all the time or
Mhm.
trying to fund ourselves. This was going to be between us and God. We've had so many people say, well, if you're ever in a jam, let us
Mhm.
know. And it's not to be mean. It's between us
Mhm.
and the Lord. And if people are seeking and it's on their hearts, then they will figure it out and God will make a
Mhm.
way. And so it's been 12 years of that. And it's been a real pruning in the process.
Yeah.
And look, waiting in truck stops and waiting upon the Lord and nobody knowing what's going on. We've had flat tires. We've had things come up, um,
Yeah.
and but every single time God has provided a way without someone knowing. And the stories in that, I mean, there's a lot of them. And
Yeah, would be.
you know, it's 12 years of daily living.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
um but that's not to say I have it under control. Like, you would
Yeah.
think after 12 years you'd be like, oh, this is old hat. Oh yeah, God's coming through. But there's still those times when the doubt is real. Uh,
Yeah.
and there have been times, where it has gotten really, really low. We've always had food, and our kids have always had food. And but it's gotten really low where I'm getting really creative with the stuff in our cabinets, and like I'm making things from scratch and using a lot of flour, and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
we're doing it, but the temptation, to run to the local food bank or to sign up for food stamps or to do these things and um, to make that commitment. And there have been times where I've made that commitment and I've said, no, that's not our witness. Lord God, you are my Lord, and the government is not my Lord, and you will provide. I know you will. You have for 12 years or however many years, and
Yeah.
um, to make that commitment and then watch the next day,
Mhm.
watch the provision come in when you're
Mhm.
tempted to make something else your Lord because it's the easy way
Mhm.
and it's
Mhm.
the way that a lot of people, um, you know, choose to go.
Mhm.
And we've always wanted our testimony to be true and pure. That it's God who's provided, and um, you know, it's just been. I just don't want people to say, "Oh, well, that's how they get their food for 12 years. Oh, they just use food stamps, or oh, they just go to local food banks or churches to give to them," and that's just not the way it's been.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
People we just meet at campgrounds. Um, there was a time we had just met this family next to us in a campground in Pennsylvania, and um, it was on their hearts to just go get us groceries, and there was no reason to. And
Mhm.
they came and brought us like a huge thing full of groceries, and it was just so neat, to just
Mhm.
see how God does that um, by walking this walk.
Wow. Yeah, that would be. That is so neat. But yeah, that is a faith journey. That it was hard. That sounds like, I mean, that's strange because we're just not used to that. That is not the way people live, right? In America, I think a lot of
Yeah.
us, unfortunately, is following the American dream lifestyle in that way. And so, sure, we say we trust in the Lord, but to go out really on a limb like that and to really put yourself out there um, is something else. And so, um, yeah, it's hard to. I can see it as strange, but I love that. I mean, you're putting yourself out there though, see, in places then that you can be a witness and be there for someone where normally you couldn't be. You would be doing the rat racing and all of that. So I can really understand when you go, travel here and there, you can be a better witness. I'm sure you really have a lot of stories, right? A lot of people that you've been able to pray for and stuff. Like you said, before you even went out on the road, you were doing that, and you were doing that in certain ways. Maybe it was a little bit of a smaller way of doing. I like one thing I just written down here while you was talking was I got, the example of the priest when they put their feet in the water's parted. They really had to do their part, right? To really trust God by putting their feet in the water. That goes to show that you're trusting in God. God makes the way, right?
He
Um,
does. He does. But like there's I I started studying pretty. We have a lot of time, so my desire is always to seek out, you know, what Christ has taught us, and He gives us a lot of if then statements. Like if you do this, then you'll have this, right? If you abide in me, then you'll get this. And abiding isn't automatic. Abiding takes effort and resting in the Lord and not in yourself. Um, and there's a lot of these if then statements where we have choices to make, and He gives us these choices to make because it's how we love Him, right? Jesus in John says, "If you love me, you'll obey my commands," and they're not commands like earning your salvation. It's the obedience of loving God and then loving your
yeah,
neighbor, and then
yeah,
through those, all the 10 commandments follow. You don't steal, you don't hurt people, you don't lie, you don't manipulate, you forgive. All the things fall under that umbrella, and so it's a way that we show our love for God and that we've been transformed, is through those acts of obedience. And I look at the disciples' life. They didn't have a lot, and
yeah.
and I can tell you, I've really changed my view of blessing. Um,
Okay.
like we went through a lot of faith churches and stuff young in our married life, and the idea of being blessed is always tied to finances. And I can't tell you how many times we even meet people now and they're like, "Oh, God has really blessed them. They've got this big house and these great jobs." And I'm like, I think like my mind is totally transformed to be just the
Yeah,
opposite.
yeah.
Like I see those things as like weights, right? Because I think of the mortgage that goes along with it, and I think of all the stuff that like goes along with all these
Yeah,
blessings,
yeah,
and the time away from family to have those blessings,
yeah,
and I mean, I think if that's really blessing, then Jesus wasn't very blessed, and we all know that Jesus was blessed,
yeah, yeah.
and we
I
all
see.
know that His disciples were blessed because it was about
Yeah,
their
yeah,
relationship with God, and you know
yeah,
sharing with others and seeing God in their lives. And so blessing has taken on a whole different meaning to me,
yeah,
um, because I feel extremely blessed. I feel
yeah.
extremely blessed when we have $0 in the bank account. And I feel, blessed if we have $1,000 in the bank account. Like, I don't know
Yeah,
what it's going to look like day to day. Um, but the blessing comes in the relationship with the Father. And that has grown deeper by letting go of the stuff.
yeah. Wow. That's like true blessing and being able to trust and rest in the Lord because people that have a lot of things has a lot of worries and they not necessarily have that rest and that peace. Like you said, the more the things you have, the big house and all these things come is a lot of time consuming too. A lot of consumes a lot of your time and maintenance to keep that up and to keep that just to keep that running. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just changes, like a lot of
Yeah.
what we thought when we got on the road has just changed as
Yeah.
we've gone along. And
Yeah.
because when you put your whole life in God's hands, not just financially, but our relationships and whose path we cross and what RV parks we go to, or anything, when you let go of all of it, you get to see what God really wants to provide
Yeah.
for you. And yes, we have things like I've got a phone and I do have a computer, and we have things, but
Yeah.
we had to let go of it all in the beginning. And then,
Yeah.
things have come back around. And um, it's different when you know that God's leading you. Does that mean we always choose God's way? I don't always. And there's times of anger, and there's times where I'm wrestling with God, and there's times where I'm like, I'm done with this, God. You're not going to provide. You're not going to do anything. And I get that way. And
Yeah.
and it's humbling when he comes through anyway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh,
Wow.
um, it's very powerful. The idea of grace changes.
Yeah.
Just a lot of things start changing um, when you're not working a 9 to 5 job and making $100,000 a year, and or whatever it is, and feeling that comfort and feeling, oh, I'm blessed, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel quite blessed, and I don't
Uh-huh.
have any of that stuff or that
Yeah.
security.
Yeah.
But my security ends up being in the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. You get your security in the right place because everything else can just go be gone. When their economy does something crazy and all of these things, you might have it one day and gone the next. And so when
Right.
you've got true security that lasts, whether you have a lot or you don't, whether everything's rosy or it's not, you got the true security and the true
Yeah.
lasting peace. Wow. That's really neat. So yeah, you must really have a lot of stories. And kind of how many states have you been around? Where and all over the states, pretty much, or just
We
kind of one area of the states, or how does that look?
we've we've been a lot of places. We haven't been everywhere, and you know we haven't even been to all like the major national parks or any of those things.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
always been like what God provides, and for us, it's really been about the people. Like if we end up in a
Okay. Yeah.
campground and the
That's
people,
your reason of.
and
Yeah.
getting from point A to point B, we might have just enough,
Yeah.
and so we follow that, and it's not so
Okay.
much about seeing all the stuff as much
Yeah.
as the people along
Okay.
the way.
Yeah.
You know, we've been to
Yeah.
a lot of places. I don't even know how many states. I've never really counted, but um, and but there was a time there was a time early in the walk. I don't know. I'll give a story, and it kind of leads into another one with our kids. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
so we left, and like I said, we had about $1,200, and eventually that ran out, and we were traveling, heading south in South Carolina, and I'll never forget it because we woke up, and I said, "Okay, we have about $20 left in the bank account," and
Hmm.
Joe was like, "Okay," and we tried to run the card, and it didn't work, and we didn't know it at the time, but we were trying to run our card at the pump in the truck lanes, and you can't do that with a regular card. You have to a special trucker's card. Well, we didn't know any of this. So we
Hmm.
tried to swipe the card and it didn't work to put $20 in. And so Joe was like, "That's it. We're just gonna go. We're just gonna go and trust God." And I look over at him like, "Okay," and he's like, "We're
Hmm.
just gonna trust God." And I'm like, "Okay." So we take off and we go, and we're trying to decide kind of where to go. And Joe made a decision. All right, we're gonna go this way, and on the interstate, and we do, and the needle starts dropping, and it starts dropping, and then I'm like,
Hmm.
"Okay, what do we do now?" And he's like, "I
Oh.
don't know." And finally, it just dies. We run out of gas on the side of the highway because we were like pressing forward in faith. God was going to fill our tank, like just these ideas you have. And there we are sitting on the side of the road. Um, Zach is about 7, Reagan is 4 at the time. So we got 2 little kids on the side of the road, no gas, and I look at Joe and go, "Okay, now what?" And he's like, "Well," he goes, "I don't know." He goes, "Let's have lunch." And I was like, "You think it's safe? Like cars are going by, the truck is swaying," and I'm like, and
Oh
he was like, "You're
wow.
right. Let's let's get out and see if we can get to a gas station to get $20 worth of fuel."
Yeah.
Okay, so we start walking down the highway, not safe. I'm But we're like this is part of that real journey. right? Like
Yeah. Wow.
we have these ideas of things, and then you start wrestling
Mhm.
with God, like, God, I'm not living like this. Like,
Mhm.
like if you're not going to provide for me, I quit, right? And
Mhm.
we're kind of like spoiled brats, like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
think I gave all this up for you, God, so now you need to like,
Mhm.
why are we on the side of the road? And there's
Mhm.
these real conversations you're having with God, and you're you're trying to figure out this walk and what it's supposed to look like and what is faith, right? Because here we are on the side of the road because we had faith. And um,
Yeah.
so anyway, so we start walking, and this guy comes and he picks us up, and he says, well, I'll take you up to the next gas station. And we thought, oh, this is why we're gonna like minister to this guy, right? And he's on his phone the whole time. Goes up. We stop at a couple places. One didn't have a gas station. The next exit like had one gas station but no gas cans, and we didn't have a gas can. So we went up to the next one, and there was a little gas can, and I think it was like $10. And so we put like a little gallon of fuel in this in this gas can, and we came back to the truck, and the guy
Yeah.
brought us back. But once we got back to the truck, there was another car stopped right behind our camper, and he had transmission issues. And the Department of Transportation had come around to help him, and he saw where we were, and he said, well, what do you guys need? And we said, well, we're out of fuel. And he goes, well, you can put that gallon in, but it's not even going to fill your lines. And so we, at this point, like Joe and I were just really upset with God. Like we really were. We were mad, and we had run out of fuel, and this shouldn't happen because we have faith and we're trusting God, um, and we're so focused on ourselves. And Joe went out to talk to this guy that had broken down behind us. And, normally we're so focused on the Lord, and we would have just talked
Mhm.
to that guy, and Joe would
Mhm.
have prayed with him, and he would have ministered
Mhm.
to him. And he's like, normally I would have told him about having a relationship with God. And he goes, but now we're questioning if we even have a relationship with God. Like, what are we
Mhm.
even doing here? And the guy came and he started our truck. The DOT put fuel in to get us started to get to the next gas station. And right as we're getting in the car, we get a phone call uh, from Joe's parents that they had received a check for us,
Mhm.
that it had come in the mail, and it was for quite a bit. And we were just like flabbergasted. Like, and we were like, all right, like, deposit the check, let's put fuel in the car, and let's go find somewhere to stay. And so we actually went from there and went straight to my parents' house in South
Mhm.
Carolina. And the whole way, like Joe will tell you, he was just like spitting mad at God, and we were like trying to figure this out. And finally, when Joe got quiet and he could hear God again, um, he just felt like God told him, "Well, what would you have done if you had just listened to me and had lunch?" And it was like, hmm, like, well, what would have happened? We just would have sat there and had lunch. Nobody hit the camper. The guy would have broken down behind us. We would have gone and talked to him. Joe would have been focused on the Lord. We would have been able to minister to him and pray with him. And the DOT guy would have come. Like it was all like there. But in
Mhm.
our
Mhm.
in our panic,
I see.
and should we have
Wow.
just stayed at the gas station? I don't know, maybe. Are there a lot of ways this could have played out?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
we were trying to learn this new walk of faith that we
Yeah.
were taking.
Yeah.
And but the whole point of it was about
Mhm.
us not being focused on our own needs,
Yeah.
because we're missing the needs of those around us, right?
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
caring for our neighbor and our brother and putting their needs above our own. It's
Wow.
treating people the way we
Yeah.
want to be treated, and it's learning to let go of that. And so where that was one of the scariest times in our whole journey, it was one of the best times because we learned that God would come through somehow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we also vowed to never leave the gas station without fuel in our car. And so, like we wouldn't do
Yeah.
that again. It's just, like God will take care of it, and we will listen. And so then the next time that something like that happened, we um, a whole nother story without going like step by step by step. But we had left a campground in St. Augustine, and we were pulling out, and we had an eighth of a tank of fuel, which wasn't going to get us very far. And this gentleman who we had prayed for, and his arm had been healed that
Mm-hmm.
month,
Mm-hmm.
came and pounding on our glass and hands us an envelope, and it had $40 in it, not 50, not
Mm-hmm.
100. It just $40, and it was the fuel that we needed to get to this next truck stop. And we decided to go to the truck stop because we didn't have what to stay at a campground. We go to this truck stop, and um, we had just done a chili dinner for the campground. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of times where like we'll feed people, and it'll be the last of what we have, or like it doesn't necessarily mean we have an abundance, but we just love to serve people. And so we had done that, and we had a lot of extra chili in the camper, and so we had stopped at this truck stop, and Joe had gone out, um, and he had decided he was going to see if any truckers wanted to have dinner because we had extra chili. And we were parked in this obscure spot, and this trucker pulled in like right next to us. And um, it was a big truck stop, and there were plenty of spots to go, but he pulled in right next to us. And so Joe was like, he went out and talked to him.
Yeah.
And I went out to find him because I didn't know that's where he had gone. And I go out there, and he is praying with this guy in the back of the truck, and invited him over for chili. And this gentleman came over and sat and had chili with us, and just talked and shared his whole life, like just the struggles in his marriage and being on the road all the time, and,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
how cell phones have like broken down what it's like to be
Yeah.
a trucker in that community. And anyway,
Wow.
just shared a whole bunch of stuff, and it was just amazing. And um, that night, though, the kids are like, are we going to go to a campground? What should we do? We want to go to a campground? And we're like, we don't know. Well, God will just, he'll make it work. We'll figure it out. And my son, who's 7, and still to this day has the most generous heart in the whole world, um, goes and he brings us his change. Like he had this little jar of change, and he brought it to me, and he says, "Here, Mom, this will get us in the campground." And I wanted to look at him and say, "Nope, it's not enough," right? Because
Yeah.
it was his change. And but I stopped, and I just burst into tears. And this, the story of the fishes and the loaves, and the boy bringing his lunch to feed the
Mm-hmm.
5,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is my son bringing me his lunch. It's what he has. And I just looked at him, and I shared that story, and I said, so God's gonna do something. Like, we're gonna have a campground tomorrow. um, and so that next morning, that we invited the guy over for breakfast, and we fed him breakfast, and he said he had to go do some laundry. And when he went to do laundry, we ended up getting a phone call from a friend of ours, and he had gotten us a Thousand Trails camping pass for the year.
Mm-hmm.
And he called, and he said, "Do you guys need a campground?" And we were like, "Yeah." He goes, "I thought so." He said, "I want to get you this membership to this camp, these campgrounds." And so it was just such a blessing. And then the truck driver came back, and he came, and he handed us $200. And
Mm.
um, we were like, "No, no, no! Like, we don't want your money. Like we just wanted to share with you." And he goes, "What you gave me was way more than $200." And he just like joyfully gave this, and he was just such a sweet man. But um it was like all of a sudden now we had $200, so we had fuel to the campground, we had a campground, and we could go get groceries. And just how God worked all of that out, and
Mm-hmm.
how I started seeing the generosity and how this was playing out in my kids. That God, even through all this journey, that God was going to take care of my kids too. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't just a journey for me and my husband, it was going to be a walk for them too,
Mm-hmm.
even though they don't know all the intricacies of it all. But so it was really uh, an interesting like first year, really, getting out on the road and seeing how God was going to come through.
Yeah. So both those stories you shared was in the first year then.
Those were, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Oh wow.
It was a
And then
lot of that getting started.
yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say, and I know you would have a lot more stories by now, but
We do.
not providing. Yeah. Yeah. And that's neat how the kids have been there to witness God's provision and just see you guys witnessing to people as God's provision, comes through in your life. So wow. To be that's really interesting. What was I gonna say? Um um forgot the last point, but just yeah, how so you felt that God wanted you to go, oh, and how does that um like look how long are you at a place? Okay, and I know you in our conversations you've already kind of said that it depends on how Lord's leading. If he'll kind of you feel to stay, you stay longer. If you feel to so I don't know if you can share a bit about that and how that looks of
We
when
don't
you go someplace and when you stay and that.
we don't really have a schedule, which is kind of nice. And so we don't really have any, obligations in any given place.
Yeah,
We've stayed some places, like if we're staying in just campgrounds, we'll stay for as long as as long as we can pay for it, or as long as God opens the door with certain individuals. Um, sometimes it's just we just want to go here.
yeah,
We learned in the beginning we were trying to make it very spiritual, like God lead us and give us clues and tell us where to
yeah,
go, and that's great to get started, but then you just start trusting and you just kind of
yeah,
go with the desire of your heart and you realize that hey, there's people everywhere that need
yeah,
God's love
yeah,
and that need to see Christ shared. And when I say that, I
yeah,
don't always mean trying to get them saved. I mean sharing in practical ways,
yeah,
helping them when they need it, or watching
yeah,
their kids because they
yeah,
can't, or
yeah,
whatever it looks like. Um,
yeah,
in any given situation. And so we've started trusting just those desires in our hearts, and we just feel that leading. Um, so there's been times we went and volunteered at a boys' ranch, and we got there. We were going to stay 2 weeks. We ended up staying 3 years. Um, there was another time where we
yeah,
ended up through a whole series of events, which is an entirely new long story
yeah,
of one thing leading to the next. But we ended up at a home for women up in Washington, and it
uh,
was for recovering women,
okay,
18 to
yeah,
however old. And we pulled in there, and God just opened door after door. And I made some amazing relationships with some of these women, and we ended up staying about 6 months.
yeah,
Um, you know, other
wow,
places it's just a week, or we'll be
yeah,
boondocking out in the desert
yeah,
somewhere, and
yeah,
God brings people there too. And
yeah,
um,
yeah,
it's just everywhere. It's kind of, I think right now we're in Oklahoma, and we're probably we were asked to stay in someone's home for a year because they need to take a trip, and so we've really prayed about that, and so I think we're going to do that. We're going to kind of house sit, but it's going to help us kind of plug in and
yeah,
do a kind of different ministry where we can have people over and pour into people on a daily basis, and not just like a 2 week basis, or you
yeah,
know just see how God grows us in a new way for a short another period of time. So it really just changes.
yeah. Yeah, what's important is that you're always attentive to
Try.
do the work of the Lord. Yeah, yeah, to be that vessel and to be ready to share, the hope and to be there for somebody. And I say what is neat is when you're traveling though, is you get to be in places that you never would have been able to. I mean, because when you've got a home, you've got these bills to pay and taking care of the home. I mean, how can you go here and there? How can you be off where you helped at a boys' ranch and off up in Washington helping out at the women's center, and that is so neat. Just that, but you have availability is a broader way of doing things. Yeah, oh, that's really neat. I really feel fascinating because I've heard a lot of different traveling families, you said maybe when you started it wasn't so common. I think it's more common not to do it maybe in the way you do. Like you said, in all your 12 years, you haven't found another family that kind of travel like you guys, though, right?
We haven't met any. I mean, we would love to, and
Mhm.
um, I just the idea of just trusting for everything, like no side
Yeah,
income, no selling
yeah,
anything, even our
yeah,
time, we don't want to sell it. Like we'll
yeah,
help people and do all kinds of things, and um, it's just it's loving your neighbor as yourself. It's giving of
wow,
yourself to serve and expect nothing in
yeah,
return,
yeah,
because that's where love comes from. And when you say that to people, do you know like so many doors open up.
yeah,
They don't understand
yeah,
because
yeah,
everybody wants your dollar now.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it really opens up an avenue to talk about
yeah,
the Lord and his provision and his trust. And some
yeah,
are open to it and some are like, okay, thanks, see ya. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's just where they're at. And we just continue to pray for people and God to lead us,
yeah,
and help in any way that we can. And so we haven't met anyone, that lives like that. Usually there's, funds being raised or go to churches to raise support, and these
yeah,
kinds of things. And we've we've just we've just decided that this is between us and God, and
yeah,
we know we can get money out of people and you can manipulate it. It's you. I never want to sell myself. I never want to
yeah,
sell a ministry.
yeah,
I
yeah,
never want to
yeah, that's
sell
right.
anything that God has done in my life.
Yeah,
I want to encourage people to walk and to follow. And I desire more than anything to not just be another good story that's, hey, oh, God did that in their life. I want to encourage people to step out, that if God can do this for us, he can do this for you. And
yeah,
if
yeah,
if God can take care of us, if we're willing to lay down our lives, and if we're willing to wait upon the Lord even when it's hard and the food is low and there's no gas to get to point A and B, if you're willing to take that journey to let God show up
yeah,
and grow you in new ways, like it is so worth it. I mean,
yeah.
it is so worth it. Some of the lessons we have learned are so deep and amazing. Um,
Wow.
and I just encourage anyone to do it. And
Yeah,
because it's powerful when we let go of our stuff and our ways of
yeah,
doing it.
yeah, it really is. When you really just let God, be in control and to really, really trust. Yeah. And like you're
Yeah,
saying, the things you've learned and grew so that you never could have in this other space where you was really providing and life was maybe easier and you never had to worry about anything and
it's
where
easier.
never had to worry. You wouldn't have learned these lessons and these things. Yeah. Yeah. Oh wow, that's neat. Well, boy, I've sure enjoyed talking to you, and I hope we get to meet you one day on
Yeah, I
our
do.
journeys.
Yeah,
Because when yeah, because in the spring when we came up here to Canada and Alberta, Canada, you guys were heading from Florida to Texas, and we just missed you, and then you ended up there in Oklahoma. So now, actually, when we go back, if Texas, if we went more trek that way, we would be able to go through Oklahoma. But
yeah,
it depends on if we went some other direction because I really like when we get to have time to kind of go somewhere out. Like when last time when we left here last fall, we went down across the eastern states a bit, provinces, sorry, and provinces, and then down into the states, and then into Illinois. We have a son in Illinois, and then through Kentucky and Tennessee. You have friends there, and so really kind of made a nice trip of it. But it's really neat. I love
yeah.
it when traveling and you're just like, who are you going to meet at the RV stop park? Who are you going to talk to? And I have a book that I've written, and who would I get to share my book with? And yeah, so it's really neat. But yeah, it's been fun talking to you. Better be
Yeah,
wrap our time up. But yeah, hopefully
sure.
we'll get to see you on our travels again and your travels. I was just any last thing that you want to share before. I know you just shared us some really good nuggets and wisdom there, but anything else you want to share with us as we close, and maybe a way for people to connect with you if they would like to connect with you and maybe hear more of your story and kind of, well, you've shared it, but I don't know, just hear like really connect and say how could we do this or what? I don't know. It's just is there ways to connect with
Well,
you and what else would you like
you
to
can
share?
find me on you can find me on Facebook. Just look up my name. I'm the only one. Um, and there's a picture of me there. And I love to share our story, with anyone that's interested in stepping out or just trying to grow a little bit more in their faith, or
Yeah.
um, just want to be challenged in something new. I know, just the day to day of just like the day to day routine, and I remember going into church and seeing everybody walking around outside of church that needed God, right? But they're never going to come in the church. And my heart was for
Yeah.
those people.
Oh yeah.
I
Okay.
didn't really
Wow.
want to go.
Wow.
I started feeling like I didn't
Wow.
want to go in there because I
Yeah.
wanted to be out there with them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Wasn't
that's
that
kind
neat?
of where we've just gone. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't
Yeah.
go in there. I'm saying my heart was like I wanted I wanted to be in the campgrounds and not just the
Yeah.
resorts, right? Like
Yeah.
everyday run of the mill people living in a
Yeah.
campgrounds
Yeah.
where you can
Yeah.
um, just meet all kinds of people, and it's really done a lot for getting rid of my judgments
Yeah.
and a lot of the judgments that a lot of times we can hold in our Christian
Yeah.
circles and those outside, and
Yeah. That's
it's
neat.
changed a lot of my
Yeah.
perspective. So
Yeah. I bet it has. Wow, and I like that you're there for the people. That's the purpose of, well, this wasn't about sightseeing and going to all these cool places. But your adventures is more in just serving the Lord and walking with the Lord and meeting people that need Jesus and need hope, need love.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, well, I wish you all the best in your travels and where you are just
you
now. I
too.
know God's obviously got you there for a reason, and just
Yep,
for your family, for your children, and for those that you will encounter there. And I just wish you all the best. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Erin. And
you
um,
too. Thank you for having
yeah,
me.
yeah, you take
All
care.
right,
And
take
yeah, for everyone else, I'll be back here next Monday. So have a good week. Okay.
it. Bye.